In Elden Ring Nightreign, memories are used by the world to save itself from absolute ruin, to halt the Night Lord and save the lands between from destruction. In the dying moments of the Shattering, a final opportunity is had to allow for one last chance to save the world. And sometimes, memories of places and people that existed throughout time meet in a final confrontation against the end of everything. One of those stories is that of the first peak, the old tip of the mountaintops. Whether you believe it was the east, the west, or merely the highest peak, the first peak was the absolute end of the mountains. In the wintry cold of the first peak, only the strongest survive, and a dragon who commands frost has lived longer than any other. Legend states that a secret protective blessing that manipulates frost can be found at the peak, but the dragon pounces on anyone who might claim it. If you recall our previous Shifting Earth video, we spoke on how the giants would make moves towards the mountaintops. After losing the forge of the God King's tomb and gaining a new power in the form of the fell god, they would carry the ever-burning fire with them, dragging it behind them from a great crucible, feeding it with blood to keep it satiated. For it is in blood that we find runes, and through runes do we find life. This migration would mark a terrible time for those people who were along the path, which would lead to legends amongst the horn scent that would be used by Mesmer to make future weapons of war, in great emulation of the giants and their golemancy, walking across the land, feeding the crucible of fire with the life force of any who dared cross their path, including even dragons. For indeed this world was rife with them. Baal's progeny run amok. While the jagged peak would make for a prominent location for a new forge, being a volcano, the presence of Baal would render an issue for the giants, and so higher ground would be sought, a position from which they could launch an assault on the volcano. This would lead them to the mountaintops, which was ruled by the ice dragons, these drakes that forewent their father's influence to instead follow a queen, who would fall to the night of this assault. Caligo, the ice dragon, whom I believe to be the previous queen of Fair Mazula, the lost love of Placidusix, his fifth head, the independent thumb of the hand of the gods. And indeed, we know that Caligo is greatly curious and drawn to the very thing that Nightreign would be defined by: memory break events. These moments in history where truly magnificent happenings would occur. A prehistoric dragon which lurks within fog. The great shadowy pair of eyes framed in frigid mist are said to appear at history's great junctures. Its coldness can readily purloin the living warmth of its victims. The giants would use their great golems to shoot the dragons out of the sky, and the smelter demons to break through their tough, icy armor, magically infused with spiritual essence from the blessing of their queen's heart. The great treasure of the mountaintops, this star sapphire of purest soul energy, which is both Caligo's heart and the heart of the meteorite that brought the ancient dragons to the lands between, as well as the original source of the freshwater rivers that run through the lands between. If the giants could get their hands on this treasure, they could once again settle the Forge crater and return to their great works. And indeed, they would be successful in their offensive, and their ascent would not be halted by the increasing storm around them. So it was that Caligo would be forced to use her ultimate power, destroying the heart of winter, which would draw in many with the winds created, before erupting in a giant tree of ice, holding up the sky momentarily before the peak would collapse. This avalanche would render the mountaintops flat and possibly collapse the entire western half of the mountain range. Unfortunately, this would not be enough to best the giants, who would survive and climb out from the wreckage and place their giant crucible of fire at the highest point, a trophy of victory against the very gods themselves. The ancient dragons would fade in relevance, their king receding into solitude after the loss of his queen, and the rest not wishing to have even more losses. And the Copper Age would continue, with the giants being top dog. The mountains, warmed from the flame, would be a luscious place, and the new homeland of the conquerors. And the older city of Rao would once again change hands, as a figure watched from afar at the star-calling events that nearly ended the world, these cataclysms that were meant to be forgotten. The Horned Ones had waited their turn, and now they would build a kingdom to steal fate for their own. And as for the plan to assault Baal in his peak, well, that's a topic for another time, where we talk about the secret weapon invented in the Copper Age. The bosses we find on the mountaintops tell us a lot about the story found here, many of them relating in some manner to the denizens that would have been found here in ancient times, feeding off the rich, rune-laden corpses of the dragons, such as the giant dogs and crows, or the yetis. There are also signs of the cataclysm that would claim the place, such as the demi-human swordsmen, who wield katanas that hearken to a starfall they fear. The Albinaric camp also gives us an inference to how old the first generation is, being created all the way back in at least the Copper Age, perhaps in an anticipation of an incumbent Silver Age? Now the night bosses are particularly interesting. For night 1, we have the Smelter Demon, which we have already addressed as being a weapon of the fire giants on the assault of the peak, this absolute titan of Golomancy and crown achievement of the giants next to their Forge Bowl. We also have Dukesteer Freya, a great spider that feeds off dead dragons, and ate a dead Caligo equivalent, and is the holder of Seath's Lord's Soul in Dark Souls 2. Nothing quite like scavengers feeding off great dead things. I'm sure she is here in anticipation of devouring the loser of this conflict. We also have the Grafted Monarch, a reference to Godfrey's future assault on the giants. Also, a reference to what would have been created by the sorceress victors of the war, and their goal to create a Night's King, a vessel of their control. It also represents how Godric mounted an assault on Mount Gelmir in Elden Ring. But that's a story for another video. This boss is also a reference to Godric's fascination with dragons as symbols of power and alliance. The ulcerated tree spirit represents the same Erd tree invasions as the grafted monarch, as well as a reference to the pus of man in DS3, as we all know, and to dragon communion, as well as how when masses of dead things come together, life is imminent, and it creates an imperfect dragon as life struggles to reform itself. There is also the Tibia Mariner, who is explained by the nature of the crystals seeming to be a source of water, and could actually be the source of the Chi rivers that feed the Erd tree and flow throughout the lands between, which would be used to ferry the souls of the world to low places, to be absorbed by great trees, to then have them rise up the network and be sent to the nascent moon, the god in the sky that shall be born upon this world's destruction. But alas, that is a tale as well for its own video. For Night 2, we have a much shorter list, with the Draconic Tree Sentinel, another reference to dragon warfare. One timeline, perhaps it was the war with the ancient dragons that led to the end of Caligo. The nature of non-linear timelines could mean that many such events could be true. The Godskin duo is interesting, but easily explained, as we find a pair of spirit Godskins in the Spirit Color Cave, called by a snail. It would seem that they would be victims of the mountain collapsing. It always feels good to answer an age-old question like that. Perhaps one day, we can figure out the Crucible Knight spirit-calling snail in a similar manner. And finally, we have the dancer in the Boreal Valley, who is none other than Night's Queen. Stay tuned for a video about that. And thus, she serves as a reference to Caligo, the Queen of Night herself. I wish I could say more, but the dancer is arguably the most important non-Night Lord boss in Nightreign. So be sure to keep an eye out for my eventual The Dark Souls Bosses Are Canon video, where I explain what the title would suggest. Now let us return to the first peak. A truly great tragedy, a wonder lost to memory, a victory none are left to remember, a cataclysm of untold power, a war of secession and conquest, and a long night that would fall. Except, in one night, Caligo was successful and ruled as a great black dragon of night with icy armor to protect her and to hide her true nature from the unsuspecting. Now, if only we knew what the staves at the tip of her wings meant in her ever-dark phase. Perhaps one day we will return to this wondrous Queen of Ice and the night she conjureth. Until then, I want to thank you for watching. It means the world to me to see your support. I beseech you, hit like and subscribe, and divest a burgeon at the bell icon so you are notified when I upload the next video. While I have tried to keep a scheduled pattern, fate can be fickle, and being in the loop will mean you're among the first to know about any changes. Thank you again, and stay frosty.